Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. This week, which is episode 336, we are talking about getting your kids on the water. Now, if you don't have kids, you don't even like kids, then hold on. The information here is still pertinent and applicable. The reason being, kids are people, and if you want to get a person on the water, whether it be a friend of yours, a coworker, a brother-in-law, a dad, whoever it is, these principles, although I'm presenting them in the context of taking a child out, and child maybe, like 8 years old or 12-year-old or something like that, not a tiny little kid, they are principles that are still going to be something that you can use. So bear with me. The second thing I want to say is that this is a topic I've talked about all sorts of different ways on the website, but I only have one podcast episode that, as far as I can tell, deals specifically about fly fishing with kids. I did a quick search, but I don't keep meticulous records about everything I talk about on a week-by-week basis. And so with that said, I am going to put a link to another podcast episode as this week's recommendation. I'll talk about it a little bit more at the end of the episode, but if you go to this podcast page over at castingacross.com, and there's always links, whether you're on Spotify or iTunes or Apple Podcasts, whatever they call it, you can click and it'll take you to Casting Across, where you can get all the information I'm talking about on the episode. But this episode is more about like how to prep your kids, how to get them ready to go fly fishing. So that episode is like a pre-work work, and this episode is actually, now it's time to go get on the water. So again, this is more slated for like an older child who's ready to get out and actually do some fishing on their own alongside of you. So again, very pertinent to somebody who is an adult who's going to be trying it for the first time. So the first thing that I want to suggest is to get equipment in people's hands. And I like to do this before we get on the water. Now, if the first time that you're taking your kid fishing is also the first time that you're giving them a fly rod, that's fine. It'll work. But my suggestion is get them familiar with the equipment and how to use it before you get on the water. So my favorite way to do it is to get out on the lawn with a hula hoop or a pool noodle or even just a Frisbee and say, try to hit that with this fly. And what I like to do is let a kid try to cast on their own. Especially if they're not getting like free rein. I don't like telling somebody, hey, here's a fly rod, go play with it for a few days, spend a lot of time messing with it, and then I'll come and critique your cast and fix it. That's not what I like to do. But when it comes to a kid, kids are generally intuitive to the way things feel. They're not necessarily thinking their way through how to use any piece of equipment, but they just have a natural knack. So whereas an adult may try to contemplate the physics of the thing, a kid is just going to try to make it work. Now, more often than not, and I can say this for my own kids and a number of other young people that I've shown how to cast, they are going to try to heave that rod like they are casting a traditional a traditional lure. So they're going to do what you do with a spinning rod or a bait casting rod or spin casting rod, which is they are going to try to get the weight of that fly to be what propels itself forward using the action and the leverage of that rod. Well, as you know, that's not how fly fishing works. So once you see that start to happen, you step in, because all they're going to do is try to do it harder. And this is the case if you've taken your kid fishing. They're throwing bobbers with worms, or they're throwing a little spinner out there. If that's what they're trying to do, then you need to stop them, because it's just not going to get better. And that's one of the reasons why I don't like to take the kid out on the water for the first time with a fly rod, because if they have fished a significant amount of time with a bobber and a worm, with a lure, with bait of some other kind, then they are going to be focused on getting that fly out there. And the way they know how to do that is to whip that thing like they're throwing a lure out. So I like to have them in the yard, and I like to let them kind of feel it out. But then the next important thing that you need to do, and this is a fly casting tip and a fly casting instruction tip, is you need to get them feeling the rod flex with the weight of the line. Now, you can do this in a bunch of different ways. My preferred way to do it is go hands-on with them and start with a firm grip, and get that rod aerialized, or excuse me, the line aerialized. Get it up there, make a back cast, a forward cast, something like 20 feet, so that there's enough line that it's going to be pulling on that rod sufficiently so that you can feel it pull. And as that's doing that, you're doing with a firm grip, as you are getting that cadence down, they're understanding that they are not going from rod tip on the ground in front of them to the rod tip on the ground behind them. They're hopefully grasping the fact that the rod is really not moving that much. I like to talk through it, say, look at where our hands are. Our hand is really only moving forward a little bit and moving backward a little bit. We are not pointing our knuckles at the ground, and we're not turning it and pointing our thumb down at the ground. It is just a backward and forward motion, and we're only moving our hand about a foot, maybe even less than that. And that's getting the rod to make the line go and really communicate that it's the rod making the line move, not us making the line move. That we're moving the rod a little bit, and the rod, because it's been designed to get that line moving back and forth, generating energy, it's pulling it and pushing it. And what we're able to do is feel it start to flex. And then after doing that, what I like to do is start to back off my grip. And so you're probably holding their hand relatively tightly. If you have a small child, then sometimes you can grip that rod enough around their hand where they are not being squeezed by you. But if you are doing that, now start to back off on the tension and the pressure, and they're able to feel that line a little bit more as you're more guiding their hand and less forcing their hand. And inevitably what will happen is you'll say, all right, I'm going to let go, and they're going to go to rod tip on the ground behind them, rod tip on the ground in front of them. That's just kind of the expectation of this is how you're going to make this thing move. But doing that over and over again so that they can start to keep that 20 feet up in the air. Now, I know false casting is not the best thing in the world, but what false casting does do, especially when you have that length of line out, is you're building line speed, and you're also beginning to feel the way that a rod flexes. You're able to feel the way that a rod moves. And then once you do that, just interrupt them and say, stop, and have that line float down in front of them. Get them to stop that rod in that forward position so that line is beginning to uncurl and that loop drops that fly right down, hopefully somewhere near that target you've thrown out there. This is what I like to do with kids because it's a game. It's fun. I enjoy standing out in the field casting to a hula hoop. I like to make it competitive. I like to put a couple of kids out there. I've got 5 boys, 4 of which are able to walk and hold a fly rod now. And they like to see how many times they can hit that little piece of egg yarn on the hula hoop compared to their brothers. And it's a great way to get them feeling line and then figuring out what is required to make a cast. Now, I'm going to move on to the next thing pretty quickly, but the one thing I did want to mention before I leave casting on the lawn is it is good to get them making long casts. But after I get them feeling what the loading of the rod feels like as that line is pulling against it, and then they're pushing it forward, and then it's pulling against it, and they're pulling it backwards, is I like to say, all right, now we're done false casting. Now just pick it up, back cast, put it down, presentation. Stop, breathe, pick it up, back cast, put it down, presentation. So that they don't, unfortunately, like a lot of adults do too, they don't start to think, all right, I got to make 5 or 6 back casts or false casts before I can actually lay this fly down. That's not what we're looking for. We are looking for fishing, not casting. So hopefully that doesn't sound contradictory. You want them casting so they can be familiar with the equipment, but you want them to know that casting is a mechanism by which we fish. It is not an end to itself. All right, so that's the first thing. I like to get them comfortable with the equipment when they are on a field. Now, casting on water is certainly a better way to develop good mechanics, particularly when it comes to pulling your fly off the water into a back cast and even making a presentation. The water is going to, because of its surface tension, it's going to make it a much, much better surface for casting on. However, if there are fish in that water, they will be a distraction. So even when I teach fly casting, I like my first casting instruction with somebody to be on grass or on like a retention pond that has no fish in it, or at least no fish known in it. All right, so that's the first thing. Second thing that I like to do with kids, as far as integrating fly fishing into their life, is say species is not important. We're going to go catch some bluegill. And I think most of us can appreciate the fact that that is not only good enough, but that's a wonderful thing. So you are going to discourage your child if you take them out onto a big trout river. You're going to discourage your child if you take them onto an intimate spring creek. You may even discourage your child if you take them onto a wild, tumbling mountain trout stream. The reason being is that on the big river, you got to make a long cast with some precision. On the small river, you're going to have to deal with a lot of obstacles and precise casting. And even on that high gradient mountain stream, there's just a lot of stuff going on around you. So I like to find the bluegill pond. And I like to get them out there with the same equipment that they're going to be using when they go trout fishing, if that is indeed the whole point. And I don't want to be disparaging against sunfish, right? I love it. It's one of my favorite things to do. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'd rather catch a 10-inch panfish than a 10-inch trout any day. But you want them to be using that same equipment so that there's a familiarity, and there's usually a pretty good one-to-one analogy between that fly rod you're using for a bluegill and that fly rod you're using for a trout, if that is indeed where you want to end up with your kid. But get them out on that pond and try to get them tied into as many fish as possible. Now, the thing that's essential here is you're not going to be fishing. You are going to be guiding for pumpkin seeds. That is now your job when you take your child fishing. And one of the things that I've certainly had as a misconception in my mind is, oh, it's bluegill. They'll figure it out, no problem. Especially if we go out in a canoe, there's nothing for them to get tangled up on. I'll bring my rod. This is going to be great. We're both going to catch a lot of fish. Maybe. If you are incredibly lucky, if all the stars align and the bluegill decide to play nicely that day. But more often than not, you are going to be confronted with tangles that you didn't even know could be formulated in that setting. The amount of times that you're going to have knots around things like the tip top of your fly rod, how you're going to snap off the fly on nothing, how things are going to get dropped in the water, how the fly is going to be hooked on them in a place that is just completely improbable. That is going to happen, so be prepared. Having two fly rods in a boat can actually be a liability, especially if it's a smaller watercraft. So just get out there and expect to be the guide. Pay attention to their casting. The thing that is going to take it from what's in your head, this amazing day where you're both going to catch, double-digit fish, to them being discouraged and frustrated quickly, is you assuming because they did a good job out on the lawn, they're going to do a good job on the pond, so you're going to just go ahead and fish. That might be the case. Your kid might be a natural, but that isn't always the case. Pay attention to their cast. Help them. Be encouraging. Give them the pointers that they need to get the fly where it has to be so that they can catch the fish, and then they can catch another fish, and they can catch another fish. I also find that it's important that you know the person that you are fishing with, whether it's your child, your grandchild, your neighbor kid, whatever it is, know their limits. When they are starting to get frustrated, when they don't want to do something, whether that is change a fly or touch the fish flopping around the inside of the canoe, don't force it, right? Again, there are times to be firm. There's times to lead and to encourage with a little bit more prompting. But again, you're trying to cultivate an entire experience that is enjoyable and that gets them wanting to do it more. Not simply so you have an excuse a few years down the line to go on a fly fishing trip, but so that they can truly enjoy something that you value. And even if it doesn't become their thing, it's something that they look on with fondness because they can do it with you. All right, so that's the first thing. The second thing. The first thing is get out on the lawn and cast. The second thing is get on the water and prepare to be a guide. And this is one of the things that I talk about just a lot on the podcast. In fact, that's one of the things I put into the preamble of my Cast 1 series, which is if you know these things, there's a difference between knowing things and knowing how to communicate things. So that's why I encourage you to go back to the basics, the 101 level stuff, for when you go to tell someone about fly fishing, whether it be casting or presentation or even just ecology, so that you're able to articulate the things that you kind of have this fuzzy, vague perception of in your head. All right, so first thing, casting. Second thing, be a guide and be an encourager. And third thing, hype it up. Make fly fishing fun. incorporate so many aspects of fly fishing into your conversation. So what do I mean by that? This is everything from making sure your kids come along with you to the fly shop, to showing them fly fishing films, reading fly fishing books, taking them to the fly fishing show, making sure that you buy them a breakfast sandwich on the way there or a big greasy hamburger on the way home, having a shore lunch that is exciting and fun and different, maybe not necessarily the food they eat at home, whether it be more gourmet or whether it be, much more bottom shelf junk food kind of stuff. Make it about the experience. Get them a fishing shirt, get them a fishing hat. All of these things add a lot of special kind of aspects to the central component of fly fishing. But at the end of the day, it's that stuff that really gets people excited and gets people wanting to come back for it. One of the things that I hear time and time again for people who started fly fishing because of their grandpa or their dad or an uncle or somebody is, we used to always do this on the way to the water. We used to always do this after the first fish of the season. We used to always do this right before, we wrapped up for the day. It's those moments. They don't have to be some big grand, experience, but the simplest things done out of love and done out of joy are the things that stick with especially young people the most. So think about what that might be and find ways to infuse your fly fishing with that. As my son and I are planning on a fly fishing trip here in a few weeks, he's of an age where I say, hey, here's some books. Read these books. Read about the stream. See if there's another stream in the immediate area that you think would be worth going to. See if there's flies that this author recommends that we don't have in our fly boxes. And then, depending on their access technology and your family's rules with it, you say, you pull up Google Maps, go find the stream, follow the stream. This is where we're going to be putting in. See if there's anything interesting around it. See if you can find a restaurant that's close by. Watch a couple of YouTube videos about other people that have fished the stream. See if there's anything that you'd like to do. See if there's anything that you think would be beneficial for me to know before we go doing that. Look around our house. See if there's places to fish around here. Check out the Fishing Games website. See if you can find information about things that they have for kids. Just look and explore. Get them excited about doing research, get them excited about seeing the bigger picture, really just, infuse the fullness of the culture and the community of fly fishing into them to the best of your ability. And I found that generates a lot of excitement. And, a donut and a hot chocolate will go a long way. I mean, I've got some of my kids that aren't super pumped about getting up early to go duck hunting, but if they know that a hot chocolate and a donut is waiting for them at like 9:30 in the morning, then they are happy to wake up early and be dead still in a duck blind for a few hours. Same thing is true for fly fishing. So, are there more things? Are there really practical things? What's the best rod for a small framed person to use? What are some of the casts that they should know? There's lots of good practical information, but the three things I would focus on off the start for a child who is able to actually go fishing is: one, get them casting with the equipment they're going to use on the water, on the lawn; two, be their guide for whatever fish they can hook into; and three, build that excitement in and for fly fishing in their life. It will pay off, I promise, in one way or another. If not in fishing, in relationship. So again, a lot of this was focused on kids, but these principles are the same for anybody else in your life. If it's your brother-in-law, you can get them excited about drinks streamside in a way you probably shouldn't for your children. So I'll let you come to all of those applications yourself. Before I get to this week on casting across and the recommendation, which I already alluded to earlier in the podcast, I did want to wish everyone a very happy season. Specifically, the fact that this is being released the day before Good Friday 2025. And of course, on the heels of Good Friday is Resurrection Sunday. And for those of you who've been with me on Casting Across for a while, you know that Vocationally, I'm the pastor of a confessionally Reformed Baptist church in southern New Hampshire. And I want to just encourage you with the good news of the substitutionary atoning death of Jesus Christ, that he took the place and paid the price of sinners, a price that we could not pay on our own because we've all said, thought, and done things that break God's holy law. But he took that punishment on the cross, the punishment we deserve, and then 3 days later, he rose again to demonstrate his divinity and that he has conquered death, and that this act on the cross 2,000 years ago in Jerusalem is made effective for all those who do repent and believe. It is a truth that is not only evident, but I believe with every fiber of my being, and is way more important than fly fishing. And so whether you celebrate or not, it's a true thing. And so I just want to encourage you to consider it, especially if you're listening when this comes out, but it is for every season and all seasons. And I'm always happy to talk about it. Matthew@castingacross.com. You don't have to have my pastor email to send me a question about that kind of stuff. So again, I've been really happy to engage with folks on matters of faith and questions they've had through Casting Across as well. This week on the website, the first article is called No Fly Left Behind. This talks about some of the lengths I've gone through over the years to retrieve lost flies. I think it's a really good read. You should read it too. Wednesday's video was called Fly Fishing with Da Vinci. A gent named David Ladenson put out a book called Fly Fishing with Leonardo da Vinci. Now, that might sound bizarre, but guess what? It's actually a really fun read with really good pictures in it. So if you want to know more about that, you can actually watch that video over at YouTube, or you can watch it straight on castingacross.com. This week's recommendation is an earlier podcast from the archives, like I mentioned, podcast episode 129, Fly Fishing with Kids. Here I talk about the prep work that you can put into your baby to get them ready to go fly fishing. I'm dead serious. The things you can do with a child who can't even understand what's happening. And you can start to instill a love, first and foremost, for nature, for creation, and for time with you. But then that, the particular of that happens to be fly fishing. So I give 3 very concrete ways you can do this, and I got a lot of positive feedback from back when this one came out. So I'll put a link so you can listen to it, I think, straight on that page over at castingacross.com. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. Please subscribe to your favorite podcast app and rate the podcast in Spotify and iTunes. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.